It's about managing the trajectory. Every plant doesn't go as expected. There will be up and downs, but there is this ability that we need to be able to monitor, to measure, and to re-steer towards the end goal.
Hey, Ron, what's going on?
Karl, I just came back from another dimension.
Yeah, I know you did. Let's talk about it.
I went to the Elements Festival, which is an electronic dance music festival in the Poconos of Pennsylvania, which is the woods. And it was 4 days long and just insane. I mean, I went with my girlfriends from college, so that was super fun. So that is another dimension because I don't get to hang out with, these four particular women as often as I would love because they're the best. But we went back to our old ways. We haven't changed. They all live in the suburbs of Pennsylvania. And I would say, they're not soccer moms, but they do take their kids to sports.
Yeah. Hey, you're a soccer mom and I was a soccer dad. So
yeah. So anyway, so you have a certain lifestyle and then you go to an EDM concert or not even concert, it's a festival. A festival is insane. I didn't really know what to expect. And I will say that we were all out of our comfort zones, but I had said before, outside of my comfort zone is my comfort zone. So it was amazing. I just learned so much. And there was 4 stages and they each kind of had their own EDM. One was very techno heavy. One was a little bit more pop. And this is called the Elements Festival. So each stage has an element associated. So fire, water, air, and earth. And since there's 4 of us, we were each one of those elements.
And I hope that the air stage was the chill out ambient stage.
It had some of that, but it's still kind of got to ramp up the energy. It went up and down, and it was that stage that was in the woods. So it was they had almost like tree houses, so you could be in one of the tree houses and look at the stage, which was really nice. And the people, all sorts of people.
Yeah.
We live in Manhattan, so we see lots of people, and it's great to see different types of people. But it was funny, they all embraced a certain type of just wearing whatever or nothing that you want to wear. I don't know if I can say this, but there was a lot of assless chaps going on.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And people of all ages. I've never seen that many butts.
Well, yeah.
That's
I'm just going to say, as long as we're not shaming any ages here. And
no shaming.
To me, it's if you can have older people with young people dancing in their own worlds, then what kind of festival is it? And I'll just make a comment. So also this last weekend, and I've been kind of living vicariously on YouTube, was Rebellion Fest, which is a 4-day punk rock festival that takes place in Blackpool, England. This has been going on for 30 years. And it's also funny to watch the videos because on the one hand, you have these people who are all punked out, leather jackets, spikes, mohawks, very spiked hair.
Yeah, but then when you're some of that, yeah.
But when you're scrolling through who are the people on the street, a lot of old dudes in shorts with paunchy bellies. And I'm like, I guess that would be kind of me. I'd be in black shorts with a beer in my hand. But, all ages, all people coming together to celebrate music is a great thing.
I would say I was on the older side.
But not on the oldest side.
Not on the oldest side, definitely not. But just in terms of the spread, I would just say most of the people were younger. And another woman came up to me and my friends and gave me a sticker that said Rave Cougar.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I was right. Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's awesome. This is the Grow Everything podcast where we talk about the impact biology has on all technologies. And we do occasionally digress into dance music and just music in general. But let's reel it in. Let's talk about what's been in the news lately. You brought up a bunch of things that this New York Magazine article with our previous guest, Mike Levin.
Yes. Wow. Mike Levin is a professor at Tufts University. He also has a position at Harvard University. The convergence of disciplines that Mike Levin operates on is amazing, and he makes sense of it. So it's embryology and developmental biology and behavioral science and physics and mathematics. This, it's just insane. So this article is titled, "What's It Like to Be a Cucumber?" Okay. So when we talk about convergence, what is it like to be a cucumber? And I read this article, and we've talked to Mike Levin. We actually are part of this organization called the Institute for Computationally Designed Organisms, and it's started by Mike Levin, Josh Bongard, and a few other people. And so we've heard Mike Levin speak about this discipline that he's looking at. And a lot of it is about this idea of consciousness on different levels, so that cells have their own agency and that there's agency on different scales. And when I was reading this article, I really had this out of body experience, because a lot of it talked about embodiment. And I'm like, wait, so I'm just in this body, and it completely shifts the way I think about my presence and who I am. It's one of those articles, and it wasn't just that article. We have talked to Mike Levin so many times, and I've also listened to him on different podcasts. So it's a complete body of work. And I feel like if you constantly read it, it's just. Whew.
Are you sure you weren't coming off of the Elements Festival when you read this article?
I actually did read it right after, but I wasn't, on anything trippy. Besides the Elements Festival, you don't need to do drugs when you go to these types of festivals, because the production quality is insane. Like, it's insane.
All right. Well, I didn't read this article, and I'm going to have to read it, and then we'll come back to it. But we will put a link to this article, to the New York Magazine article, in the show notes. It is behind a paywall, but figure out a way to remove the paywall and read it, because we know Mike Levin is a very deep thinker. And if you had an out-of-body experience, I'm sure I'm going to be blown away, because every time I listen to him, I'm blown away too. The first time I heard him was at a NYDSI conference, and I immediately said, we need to get this guy on the podcast. Like, the way he thinks is just so next level. And when we were at the WCDO meeting, he was talking about being able to translate alien languages, because how do you talk to cells? Cells have their own language. So
yeah, they have their own language, their own consciousness, their own purpose and intent. Reading it in a meta way, like applying what he's saying to you and your experience, it's like, that's what really creates out of body experience. Rather than looking at him as a scientist, spitting out facts, putting yourself in his mind and like trying to listen to him that way, is when you're like, wait, wow, there's a lot to. I could listen to him to talk for hours, but the application of it, and that's when it gets interesting, because he's not just talking about woo woo, like this is just theoretical. All the work that he's doing is experimental, and then focusing on applications. And there's some things he has coming out too, when it comes to anthropods and xenobots, which are these new organisms or new life forms that have purpose and agency on the micro level, but they're either for cleaning up the environment or for helping with tissue regeneration or human health. So it's fascinating. Anyway, we got to move on.
all right. Well, listeners, go back and listen to the Mike Levin episode. We'll leave a link to that one in the show notes as well. Erum, you also flagged another article that I didn't read. So where has Karl been?
Karl, you just, you need to take some time off. It's okay. We've been really busy at Messaging Lab, so I totally get it. And this stood out to me because I saw Bristol Myers Squibb spending $2 billion for a manufacturing campus in Houston. And Houston in particular is a flag, because you'll be going to Houston next month for an investor summit that is part of World Biomarkets. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll send this Karl, you have to go down and check out what's going on the ground when you're there. But this $2 billion for a pharmaceutical company to be making a manufacturing plant in Houston, I thought it was so interesting that they're looking to make jobs there. Houston is known for having a lot of scientists down there, because there's a lot of oil and gas, a lot of chemists. And then we have our friends at First Bite that are down there, and other biotech companies. But did you check this out a little bit?
Yeah, no, actually, this article I did read. I was thinking about the next one that you brought up, because Houston's already well known for the MD Anderson Cancer Center. And in this article, BMS said that they looked across the country to figure out the best place to make this investment. And typically, biopharma tends to be located either in Boston or in South San Francisco. This is where they're really the hubs of the biotech industry. And yet there has continued to be a lot of cancer research in Houston. So BMS said that they looked at a lot of different locations, and Houston came out on top. I'm excited for the people of Texas. I think this just makes what they're doing, just validates it to have BMS down there. And it's a huge deal. It's going to create a lot of construction jobs, and it's long lasting work. It's not just like these data centers where it's like a bunch of jobs are created at the beginning. Then you've got like 5 people running this massive data center afterwards. So congratulations to BMS. Congratulations to the people of Houston. I think this is a big, really important development for biopharma.
Yeah, I'm sure this is kind of the normal price tag to build a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant. But I think of our friends at Neon Bio. I'm like, should they be building farms?
Right, exactly. Well, that's a different thing. For those of you who don't know, go back and listen to the Neon Bio episode so you can understand how they're biomanufacturing using chickens and eggs. And I think the BMS is doing both research and biomanufacturing there. So I think it's a great thing. I think it's important for the knowledge and the manufacturing to be spread out. You don't want things to be too concentrated in one place. Hurricane come and wipe out the infrastructure, which is what we don't want in any industry.
Right, right, exactly.
All right, so now here's the article that I didn't read that you were like, Karl, how come you haven't read this?
Yeah, this one was a good one, written by Wintermute, working on an agency called American Wetware. And so this article is called Bio AI is All Atlases and Nowhere to Go. Really meaning that, there's a lot of platforms that are being developed, but what are those platforms enabling, right? And the beauty of this article, I want to give them such a shout out because they are incredible writers. And the way this article starts out is making an analogy between AI and creation of this infrastructure, but what is it being used for with the automotive industry? And it really highlighted on the Michelin brothers who were part of the rubber industry. And rubber was the picks and shovels of the automotive industry, right? There were such rubber parts being sold, then tires, and every car need tires. So that was the platform being developed, but the cars needed somewhere to go. And they really saw that they need to inspire people with cars to go places. And they created the Michelin Guide, which was in 1926. And at first it mapped out roads, but then it started adding the restaurant review and changing the behavior of people to go to destinations. And so the idea is, what are the destinations in biotech? What products are being developed? What innovations being developed? And how do you facilitate that? And they saw that they took the analogy of the MIT Media Lab, what they did for tech when they created this consortium of industry to work with MIT and just academics to create shared IP. And it's this culture that they created. MIT Media Lab folks are great. I've been there a couple times. And it was very inspiring. And I think it speaks to a lot of what we talk about here. So we certainly should get Jake on and talk to him about it.
Yeah, and after this article came out, I haven't read it, so I have to go back and read it. And I do think that we could do a better job as an industry to let people know what we have. So Michelin, clearly, roadmap, and then restaurant reviews. What do we have that's the equivalent? I think June AXEP was working on something similar to start like a database of all biotech produced products, particularly on the consumer side. But as this article came out, Christina Agapakis posted a video where she sequenced her genome and then she started reading it like astrology. What would happen if you took your genome and you were able to really decipher it the way that people look at the stars? And I suggested to her that she should connect it to like an MCP server like Open Ephemeris, which actually does read the stars. So what would happen if you had your genome and you invented your own algorithm so that you could look at the stars and really understand your biology better through what is happening in astrology, which is like for a lot of people is a pseudoscience.
Mike Levin will be like, you know what? Not pseudoscience. You just got to do an experiment and see.
Yeah, exactly.
The whole thing is like nothing's crazy. You just got to do an experiment and see. And he talks about higher order intelligences too. So maybe there's something going on with the stars. But one thing I did want to bring up, the Michelin Guide for Biotech, it's us, Karl.
Yeah.
It's this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, there's got to be a way that we can take what we've done and map it out like a Michelin Guide or something like that. And I love that Mike Levin says test and experiment because and I hate to go down this road because now people are going to be like, Karl, what have you been reading? But in the world of modern magic, not Harry Potter, but chaos magic tradition, it's all about experimentation. It's about setting up experiments to see what you can do to change reality. So that is not what I'm reading. I'm just bringing back things that I have read in the past. And just so you know, I have been reading a lot. I read a mystery novel that took place in Wyoming, and then I'm reading a Spanish novel, actually a Catalan novel called I Gave You Eyes and You Turned Towards Darkness.
Carl, now I know why you probably aren't reading these articles about the industry.
I'm reading in the Catalan novel is all about basically like a haunted house and tons of people making deals with the devil. So it's a lot of fun.
Carl's fantasy summer is happening right now.
Short novel. Okay, so let's bring it back for listeners who know we've done this extensive series on biocolors. And a lot of the reason we've done that is because we're interested, but also because there's been regulatory tailwinds. There's been a ban. They want to pull synthetic colors out of food because there's a lot of questions whether they're safe or not. So the Trump administration just proposed new regulations for food additives. And what the FDA wants to do is to make companies document and submit their safety rationale for any new ingredient. So this would include colors and biocolors. So right now, as we've said on the podcast, companies could self-regulate with the generally recognized as safe or GRAS regulations. You can put food together and you can say it's safe. You're self-regulating. They want to change those rules. Of course, there's been some pushback on this because it does require a lot of work on the part of industry. Erum, we've been close to the color to all these biodye manufacturers. What's your take on this?
I mean, I think it's a good thing. It should have happened from day one, but we learned, and it says it's mandatory to report all these new ingredients. Fine, but then if they're not reported, I'm just kind of curious what the consequences are. Like, I don't know if you saw that. I didn't read this article. This is the one I did not read.
I think, in a lot of cases, it feels like the consequences are non-existent so far. But government, I think, works a little slowly, even though this government has tried to work a lot faster on these things. So I think eventually there's going to be fines or things are going to be pulled off the shelves.
Yeah. And I think it's a good thing. Rather than seeing it as like a regulation that you're mandated to do something, it's more like, let's just collaborate and everyone put their cards on the table so we know what ingredients are out there, so we can help like pinpoint what are allergies, what is influencing what, and I know that there's probably a lot of molecules that are proprietary, but you don't have to give them like the actual molecular structure. I don't know that level of disclosure that needs to happen. We should always be safe and transparent. Like, that's always my thing. Like, if you're not transparent, then what are you hiding type of situation?
Yeah, exactly.
And I get protecting IP, but like you can work around that. And it's good for the consumer, right? But also you want an informed consumer to share the information. You want them to understand what you're making because you want to make something that's for them versus like just giving them whatever is out there. But, there's been a lot of great things coming from these companies. So it would be helpful for everybody. I don't think there's a loser here if you disclose your ingredients.
Yeah, being transparent about safety is a win-win for everybody. And I think that that's the perfect transition to today's guest. Today, we're very happy and pleased to introduce Olivier Rolland onto the podcast. Olivier has spent his career building value chains that make the bioeconomy real. So he most recently has been at L'Oreal, where he's the Global Director of Strategic Initiatives and Sustainability. So he leads science-based work to shrink the company's Scope 3 footprint through new technologies. Before that, he spent 15 years developing sustainable products. He was at Michelin, interestingly, and also was at TotalEnergies working on sustainable aviation fuels. And he also ran the Toulouse White Biotechnology Center, which is a public-private institute that turns leading-edge R&D into pre-industrial projects and startups. And we've worked with companies from Toulouse White Biotech in the past. Micropep is a company that came out of there that we worked with early on. So with that, let's let Olivier take it away. Olivier Rolland, we are so thrilled to have you on the Grow Everything podcast.
Well, thank you very much for your invitation. Hi, Erum. Hi, Karl. Very nice to be here with you to chat about biotech in the next hour, I guess.
Yeah. So At L'Oreal, you had this really unique role. You were Global Director of Strategic Initiatives in Sustainability Research and Innovation. What did that role entail? Like, you're talking about a massive monster of indirect carbon footprints and things that are created outside of the walls of the company and maybe by your suppliers or customers. And these things are known as scope 3 emissions. How do you tackle that? It's a big challenge.
So, Carl, there are a lot of different questions in the first question, actually. So maybe about my role first. With our strategic initiative department, our mission is basically to provide to L'Oreal Group some options, some directions, some position when it comes to reducing its environmental impact on what we call the scope 3 of the value chain. And what this entails is basically the upstream part of the value chain, from the extraction of natural resources to the raw material that we buy and formulate, and the downstream side, the use phase and the end of life of our product. And we, within research innovation, we are focusing on the ingredients and the formula. So we are focusing on the content of the product that we sell. And we have three major strategic axes. One is actually carbon, the one you were referring to with CO2 emission. And here we are really here to support the group in deploying its decarbonization strategy that is relying both on low carbon solution and defossilized solution. Number two is streamlining the use of water, because when we look at our value chain, we are withdrawing water, when we are producing bio-based ingredients for the production of crops. And also each of us in our bathroom, when we need to rinse off our products, we're using water. And finally, as we are defossilizing, we are using more and more bio-based ingredients. And so we need to increase the resilience of the value chain, or the supply chain, if you wish, of these bio-based ingredients.
Yeah, that is a lot of work. That is a lot of work, but it's so exciting that you have, first of all, that this role exists and you were really looking at all different parts of this sustainability initiative. But let's take a step back a little bit and look at what brought you here today. So your career spans biomaterials at Michelin, jet fuels at Boeing and TotalEnergies, and now this world of green sciences at L'Oreal. I'd love to know what took you from this greening heavy aircraft, like this huge industry, down to the molecular level of consumer beauty.
Well, it's at the end of the day, it's all about chemistry and molecules, if you wish.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just tell you a story. When I started my career with Michelin, I was looking at the opportunity that synthetic biology was representing in order to diversify and secure our raw material supplies when it comes to producing synthetic elastomers, which is basically a way to get, I would say, similar performance, not the same, but similar performance as natural rubber. And when we talk about this, we are talking about the big family of isoprenoids. And guess what? When I was developing sustainable aviation fuel with Total, this was based on a specific isoprenoid called farnesene. And actually, the company we were collaborating with, Ameris at the time, was developing a new way to source squalane, which is also an isoprenoid. So long story short, it's basically a molecular journey. But beyond that, I think it's also about how we can get new, innovative, and sustainable way to source these molecules. And this is about industrial biotechnology. And what I learned about that, it's there is a huge potential in terms of, I was saying, securing, diversifying the supply of raw materials. But it is not that easy to achieve it from an economical standpoint. And actually, it is sustainable by design, but it is not sufficient to make a business case. And so that has been kind of my red line in a way. How can we make industrial biotech economically viable at the end of the day?
Yeah, it makes sense. It is a lot about what we talk about here on the podcast and in general with our friends and our clients. Now, I do remember we were lucky enough to work together on this report for AB4S, which we'll get into in a bit. But you said that good science isn't enough, which sounds like something we talk a lot about when it comes to commercialization and reaching the market. And the reason good science isn't enough is due to cost gaps in climate innovation. When a biotech startup pitches a beautiful green molecule to a company as big as L'Oreal or a company like Michelin or TotalEnergies, what's the ultimate economic reality check that they need to be taken seriously?
I would actually reframe a little bit because I think it's not just about the economical reality. Let me maybe take a step back. If we think about biotech products, this is today a massive industrial and commercial reality. Let's talk about ethanol. It's 80 million tons a year that is being produced. Let's talk about amino acids. We are talking about several millions tons per amino acid being produced. And so we know to produce industrial biotech-based products at the right specification, at the right scale, and at the right price point. We know that. What happened is that at the beginning of the 21st century, there was this emergence of synthetic biology, the ability to engineer living systems so that we can drive to a specific properties, performance, specific feature. And we massively invested in this respect. At the beginning, it was on biofuels, in the 2010. But then when the barrel of oil dropped from 100 to $50 a barrel, then biotech was not competitive anymore for fuels. And so this is where the sector pivoted toward food and feed, agriculture, cosmetics, and so on and so forth. But when you think about the level of expectation that was raised at the time, we actually did not meet that. The pace and the scale of this transition did not meet our initial collective expectation in this respect. And so I have one hypothesis for that, which is that we as a community, we demanded to do all the things at the same time, meaning we needed to get sustainable products, like net zero, that have equal or better performance than the incumbents, that was produced at scale in a cost competitive way with the fossil-based incumbents. And I believe this is a conundrum we were in, and that makes this large-scale deployment difficult. And so to your initial question, when we meet those startups in biotech developing these new products, it's more about where do we find the sweet spots? And again, sweet spot being specification of the products to make sure that it will meet the customer needs, the economic equation, that if we can have additional performance, we can have additional value on the market. And number three, it has to be sustainable. But how do we find the sweet spot?
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely where biotech commercialization has to grapple. It's like you can't have all three. But obviously, it's something that we all are trying to work towards, checking all those boxes off. And especially on the sustainability side, we always hear is sustainability isn't enough. It has to have the performance, it has to have the price point. But it is still very important. And really the breadth of your work looking at scope 3 emissions, because they occur completely outside of a supply chain. How can consumer goods giants use biotechnology to redesign or clean up a supply chain that it doesn't directly control?
So if I take the example of L'Oreal, L'Oreal has been leading the sustainability journey in our beauty industry for more than 30 years now. Today, we are at the middle of our second corporate-wide sustainability program called L'Oreal for the Future. And one of the major pillars of this program is how to defossilize our raw material portfolio. Our objective by 2030 is to achieve 75% of our raw material being either derived from nature, meaning bio-based or for inorganic compounds derived from abundant minerals, or from recycled materials. And today, at the end of 2025, we were at 67%.
Oh, wow.
And in order to do that, we actually define what we call the Green Sciences program. You mentioned the Green Sciences earlier. So basically, this is about defining what are the most environmental friendly processes that should be used in order to produce the ingredients that we formulate. And so we are looking at green extraction. We are looking at green chemistry, according to the 12 principles of green chemistry. And we are also looking at biotechnology. There is a specific point I want to make with regard to scope 3 emission, and this is something that is usually overlooked in biotech and also in the cosmetic industry. Biotech, and that's my personal belief, is not at a point today where it can have a massive impact on scope 3 emission. And why is that? Because when you look at scope 3 emission, most of it is coming, and I'm speaking across sector, it's coming when it comes to chemicals, ingredients, material. Most of it is actually coming from commoditized molecule, meaning large volume, very low cost, and biotech is not there to achieve this low price point. So my perspective in this respect is that biotech is more about innovation that is actually sustainable by design, right? And so coming back to your question about how we engage with our upstream partners, because this is done under our control, well, we engage with them to find innovative solution in order to deploy our biotech ingredients. So I can give you just a few examples.
Yeah.
We are collaborating with Microfit, which is a French company that develops microalgae-based cultivation. And we have been combining that with our unique expertise in skin science so that we can actually develop a new generation of microalgae-derived cosmetic ingredients for longevity.
Oh, wow.
Another example is one product that is already on the market called Endobioma. And so this was developed with micrioles. And what it's about the micrioles isolating endolysins, which are enzymes that can actually destroy the cell walls from phage organisms. And so we managed to develop this product to target selectively Staphylococcus aureus that is responsible for inflammatory skin disease such as eczema. So you see, it's really about innovation, I believe, from a biotech standpoint.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah, I love that. Now, I know that you're based in Toulouse. I didn't realize until we wrote these questions that you had been leading Toulouse White Biotech. And I am friends with Pierre Monsan and had worked with Thomas Laurent of Micropep, who also came out of Toulouse White Biotech. And you were there and you were focusing on this idea of transitioning academic research into industrial startups. Can you give an example of something that either worked really well or failed spectacularly that changed how you think about scaling up biology?
So yeah, that's right, Karl. I actually took over Pierre, who was the founder of TWB. And maybe just for the one who are listening to or watching us, I think it's important to understand that TWB is a public-private partnership that is developing innovative biotech solution for industry. And we are looking at TRL 3 to 5. My major learning at TWB and also before, when I was engaged with TotalEnergies and Ameris developing sustainable aviation fuel, is that scaling biology is about doing three major things. One, you have to optimize a microbial catalyst or a biological catalyst. And this is super deep tech.
Yeah.
Two, you actually have to get this catalyst into an industrial setup and get it up and running. And this has to be super low tech. And then number three, you actually need to sell these products to consumers. So you need to make sure that these products will meet consumer expectations. And so my learning, I've been working a lot with startups, it's incredibly hard to be able to do all these three things at the same time by a unique organization like startups. And to me, we really need to think about it differently. We need to de-risk upfront. And there are different ways we can do that. One is how can we reasonably achieve target costs? And I have seen a lot of time, and I have been part of this, where we fall ourselves with some unrealistic price targets, right? And so basically what we need is strong modeling, being able to deliver strong techno-economic analysis right at the bat that will be refined as we progress in terms of technical performances. So that's one, it's about cost and technical analysis. The second thing is, And we developed that actually in the Advanced Biotech for Sustainability first report. How can we reduce the variable right at the gate? One of the major issues that we are facing is companies or startups failing at the scale up and industrialization. And because you cannot de-risk everything in the lab, you actually need to scale up, and that's what it is for. And now what we see is a new wave of projects that are trying to de-risk right at the bat. And the way they do that is they are constraining themselves. So let me give you an example. We are seeing more and more projects that want to retrofit ethanol facilities.
Yeah.
Why? Because the capex is already there. But there is a consequence to that. You have to go through an anaerobic process. So basically, you are already constraining yourself, and you will not be able to do whatever you want. But I think this type of retrofitting, type of co-production completely makes sense. And then number three is basically about your industrial partners. How can you onboard your industrial partners in order to cover the whole value chain? This is something we also learn at L'Oréal since we launched this Green Senses program. And what we're trying to achieve is to partner both with innovative startups, but also with a partner, one of our chemical suppliers, who can actually help scale up and industrialize a product as the right specification that will be able to source. And that's basically what we put together with the agreement we announced, I think it was 2 years ago now, with Abolis, a French synbio startup, Evonik, a chemical suppliers, and L'Oréal to basically develop the next generation of innovative ingredients.
Wow. I love how you broke it down to the three, the techno-economic analysis, looking at constraints, which I really appreciate that. It reminds me a lot of the space science. We've had a lot of people who is working on space biotech, and they have a lot of constraints, and the innovation that comes out of that versus just doing anything willy-nilly, and the constraints coming from the industrial partners. By the way, we did just recently have Amorous on. We had Debut, which we could talk about that. We know that they have a relationship with L'Oreal as well. But I do want to kind of tug on this thread of biology and deep science. You have this research that happens, and scientists, they just want to optimize. Nothing's perfect. They want to make sure they have the perfect thing, and commercialization, you can't wait for perfection. So how do you bridge that gap between public research or private academic research and corporate industrialization?
Well, you might be surprised. I think at the end of the day, it's about alignment on expectations. Let me share with you a story that I experienced several times in the past. So I have been involved in different instances in due diligence in order to put together partnership between startups and large corporations. And there is this common thing that I have seen repeating and again, and again. And I'm talking about the time that goes from the 2010s to now, which is you do a due diligence, you sign the contract. And when you actually start the collaboration, you are never at the level of maturity you had thought you would be. And it's okay as long as we can manage it. And for me, it's more about expectation and how we ensure that we align in between the executives of the startup, executive of the large corporation, the expectation, because the drivers are orthogonally different, right? One, a startup, it needs to survive, it needs to develop, it needs cash, it needs finance. Whereas a large corporation, it's here for the long run, right? It's about developing the next innovation that will generate great value in his business. And so it's about trying to plan ahead and to be able to design milestone that will meet the expectations. It's about managing the trajectory. Every plan doesn't go as expected, but there is this ability that we need to be able to monitor, to measure, and to re-steer towards the end goal. So the end goal should remain the same, or we can actually stop the project, and that's fine, or we actually manage the trajectory to get there. So I answer maybe differently to what you expected your question, but for me, it's really about expectation at the end of the day.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was well said.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that the people need to hear over and over again, especially when it comes to these partnerships between a startup or an emerging company and a big company, because the expectations are different in the way that you meet those expectations is by constantly communicating with each other and making sure that expectations are met on both sides. Now, Olivier, you talked a lot about academia and large corporations, but now let's bring government into the mix. You were appointed by the French government to serve as an ambassador for sustainable materials in France 2030. What do you see as being the biggest bottleneck in European biotech infrastructure that stops local startups from scaling and becoming global players?
So before I answer directly your question, let me give you a few context elements. I've been active a long time in the US, and I have seen the US funding a lot biomanufacturing. US has been massively investing in biomanufacturing for a long time, for a matter of national sovereignty, but also now it's a competitive tool in the global setup. And looking back now in Asia, in particular in China, China has been ramping up industrial biotech like crazy. It is amazing now when you go to China and you meet these pretty young companies who have state-of-the-art technology platform. They can do research, innovation, development, but they also have access to huge pilot facilities and large-scale manufacturing.
Yeah.
And Europe has been really great and is still great in terms of innovation. Innovation is popping out in different places in Europe. So it's kind of spread out, but great in innovation, but had a hard time to materialize this innovation into an industrial reality. And to your question about what has been the major bottleneck, my perspective is that it has been extremely difficult for successful startups to bridge a scale-up gap. So to bridge a Series A's gap. Yeah. And why is that? Because there is a lack of investors in Europe. And when I say that, let me be clear. I feel like we have much less investors than what you would find in the US or in Asia. And the investment envelope for biomanufacturing is much lower by an order of magnitude, at least, to what you will find in those two areas. And so for me, that is something that Europe needs to tackle. And actually, this is part of the revision of the bioeconomy strategy that has been published by the European Commission last November. So this is a clear topic that they identify that they need to solve, a clear challenge. And we'll see, because they are now working on translating this revision into the EU Biotech Act number 2, which will be a legislative act this time in order to really pull the biomanufacturing demand.
Yeah.
One region that needs the funding for biomanufacturing, I would say it's Europe, because they are the one region that really embraces sustainability as a narrative and the regulatory that's around that. So if they had that type of private capital and the mix of government and other types of financial mechanisms, it could really scale up fast. And it's exciting that it's becoming a legislative effort now. So I'm excited to see what Europe's going to be doing in industrial biomanufacturing.
And actually, Erum, on this side, you mentioned a point, which is Europe is pretty advanced when it comes to sustainability, and that's true. But what we've seen in the last couple of years is that sustainability by itself is not sufficient anymore. I'm not sure it has been sufficient in the past, but here we clearly see now that we need something more. And what we have seen with the implementation of the CSRD, which is a corporate sustainability reporting directive, large company had to go through the double materiality analysis, which is basically an analysis that look into how the value chain of a given company is impacting nature and is impacting the ecosystem delivered by nature, like biodiversity, like water, and vice versa, which looks at how nature that is being evolving because of climate change is impacting the turnover of large corporations. Wow. And so we have this new notion that is the resilience of the business. And it's interesting because it is intertwined with sustainability by design. Yeah. And so I think now there is also this new thinking that we see about how, as a company, how can I make my value chain resilient for the long run? Because this will lead to my turnover at the end of the day. And so I think this is also where biomanufacturing, biotech has a critical role to play in this respect.
Yeah, I mean, as we are recording this, we've seen the Strait of Hormuz close and open and close and open. And I think many countries are looking for ways to kind of achieve either energy sovereignty or, manufacturing. And one of the ways you solve that is through biomanufacturing. We actually met and worked on this report for AB4S, the Advanced Biotechnology for Sustainability Coalition report. And Olivier, I just wondered, were there any big takeaways from that report that you might want to mention and how they impact your thinking about growing the bioeconomy?
The way I think about advanced biotech for sustainability was initially kind of a think tank gathering different players from this value chain who had one thing in common: they wanted to promote biomanufacturing. So they basically analyze what has been going on, what was the bottleneck, and see how we can unlock or unleash the potential of biotech. If we look at the first report, I would say there were two major insights that were kind differentiating from what I have seen earlier. One is about the sustainability potential of industrial biotech. We had a 360 look from an environmental perspective about the real potential of biotech, not just about carbon, but about water, about land use, for instance. The second, actually, takeaway for me was the frame that was proposed at the end of this first report. And this frame was about three major guidelines. One we already discussed was how we can reduce the variable from a scale-up and industrial standpoint right at the beginning of the project. The second one was, and we also alluded to that a little bit earlier, how can we make a deep tech into a low-tech process? And the third one was about standardization. Can we actually standardize a little bit this industry? Because when we think about biotech, a lot of people are thinking about the pharma industry.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how pharma has been able to standardize the whole process of development of a given molecule, right? And this helps a lot because we were talking about expectation before. Well, when you are preclinical or when you are clinical trial one, you know exactly where you are in terms of level of maturity, what risk you are taking, how much you will have to spend in order to get there. We don't have that in industrial biotech.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the type of thing that we need to push for so that we all speak the same language. And so we all have the same level of expectation.
Yeah, I really enjoy that whole process of speaking to all the stakeholders that are part of the Advanced Biotech for Sustainability Coalition and being able to understand where they see some challenges and opportunities. And this podcast is called Grow Everything. So there's a lot of opportunity. Where do we focus? What can be manufactured? That's the low-hanging fruit. And I really appreciated that we brought this report together to help guide industry and say, hey, look, take a look at these molecules, take a look at how this can be done, and then we're here to help. So I just love the commercialization of it because the think tank part's great. We got all the information, all the insights, but then what's next? And I appreciate the action part after we have the ideas.
Yeah, and actually, Advanced Biotech for Sustainability is not a closed group of organizations. The objective is basically to gather the organizations that are willing to promote and to unlock biotech. And so now we enter into this new phase. We are transitioning from this think tank type of activity towards what I call the reduction to practice of what we have been preaching, so that we can really demonstrate experimentally that we can go faster, that we can go cheaper, and we can get there at the end of the day.
Yes. And then standardization and aligning on these ideas is such a great opportunity. I love the idea of having coalitions to help transition big industry. I mean, it's always kind of been there, but I think because everyone saw so much success in the idea of like one company dominating from the world of software in Silicon Valley, that venture capital and one company winning it all is like this new model. But in biotech and trying to make this huge transition, you can't just do it alone. You have to do it collaboratively across many different stakeholders and do it in a way that everyone can understand and work together. So I do appreciate that part, just the fact that these companies came together and they're open and they're wanting to do more and actually do work. We've heard the conversations and let's do this, and it's like, okay, great, like people are moving, and I love that part of it.
Erum, if I can
Yeah.
just step in here, I feel that we are also now starting to think differently about this whole value chain.
Mm.
In the past, if we go back to the 2000s with synthetic biology, the way I see it is that there was this huge investment, mainly in the Silicon Valley, mainly from investors who were coming from the digital world and they were looking for the next revolution.
Yeah.
And so they're investing massively in those synthetic biology companies. One of the major issue was the fact that you had to build the platforms, the technology platforms. We took a lot of money, a lot of investment to do that. And the second thing was you had to develop a molecule. So after developing the whole catalyst and process, you had actually to put steel on the ground. So there's a lot of capex. So basically, at the end of the day, it was becoming harder and harder in order to get an okay return investment. And we saw billions of dollars being spent at that time. And what we are seeing today is actually we are seeing this value chain becoming much more fragmented, and we are seeing players we were not seeing before. And so that's one of the key learnings in my career in biotech, which is one organization will most of the time not be able to do it itself. And so it will take basically a combination of different organizations that can really bring on each step of the value chain their technologies, their capabilities. And at the end of the day, this is, I think, how we will make it. So this coalition aspect, I think it's critical.
Yeah, very critical. Startups still exist. They still need a pathway. They still need inspiration. And you've been talking to a lot of startups. There's been the Green Sciences Incubator. I'd love to know a little bit more about, are you looking for companies that are creating entirely new high performance novel molecules or cheap bio-based drop-in replacements for chemicals you already use?
So first, we have some voluntary commitments. I mentioned our defossilization objectives, but we also have a net zero objective. And, by 2030, we want to reduce by 28% roughly our CO2 emission coming from the upstream part of our value chain. And when you think about that, this is something that is related to large volume ingredients. So we're talking about functional ingredients. So we are talking about ingredients that are commoditized. And again, I don't believe that biotech is today at the point where it could solve for this. And so here we are active with our supplier, but we are more looking at what we call low carbon solutions. When it comes to biotech and innovation in general, there are different ways we interact with startups. It goes from some tripartite agreement, as I was mentioning earlier, with a synbio startup like supplier Evonik and L'Oréal. We have some direct relationships, the one I was mentioning with Microfit on the algae side. We do some acquisition as well. We acquired a few years ago Lactobio, microbiome-based company in Denmark. And you mentioned there is a green cells incubator. And so this incubator, the way you can think about it is it's not a physical incubator, it's more a model. It's more an agile model by which we are working with startups. And the whole point of this is when you have some startups that are developing some technology and products, there is a question about can we leverage that for the beauty industry, for our sector. And so it's really about demonstrating the proof of potential of what the startup is developing in the area for the beauty industry. It's typically a 12 to 24 months collaboration. We, L'Oréal, we are funding this work. And at the end of the day, there is a go, no go. If there is a go, we define or we carve out a field in which we are continuing to develop this technology to incorporate our in development pipeline. And if there is a no-go, we actually retrocede the right to use the IP generated during the collaboration. And that is super important for the startup because that way they can leverage what they have been doing with us. And I think the philosophy in all these different relationships at the end of the day is to ensure that when a startup engages with L'Oréal, this generates value for the startup. whenever we stop, if we have to stop.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. You talked about these efforts around defossilization and decarbonization, and you've seen this both in the aviation industry and in the beauty industry. But what's one major lesson that you took from SAF or sustainable aviation fuel that could be applied to the beauty industry?
I have heard a lot people out there looking at the cosmetic industry as kind of the graal to deploy biotech and to deploy defossilized products. And when I started to interact with L'Oréal, I actually joined the scientific advisory board there, and I actually realized that I had a complete misconception of this sector. And what I mean by that is, think about the product, the shampoo, makeup. Think about the content of this product, the formula. The formula is composed of active ingredients and functional ingredients. The active ingredients is the basis of the claims, the scientific claims, and the performance for the customer, right? And the functional ingredients is basically to ensure the texture, to ensure all the sensoriality of it. And in our industry, in our sector, there are large volume functional ingredients. Take the foam when we use our products. Take the solvents. Take the preservatives. All these materials are large volumes and are actually very low price in the market. Those are commoditized ingredients.
Yeah.
And so, to your question, when you think about SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, it is a commoditized product.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, when I was working in that, I started there in 2010. I realized that there was no way that sustainable aviation fuel could emerge without the right regulatory setup. And the reason is pretty simple, is because let's take Europe. We have been mandating incorporation rate of biofuels in fuel for cars, trucks at the gas station, right? And so if you take a refiner, if they have the choice between producing biofuel for cars or biofuel for aircraft, they will go for cars because there is a mandate. You have to comply with the mandate. And actually, it's less expensive to go for cars than to go for sustainable fuel. There's been a pivot the past few years because we started to see some mandatory incorporation rates in order to deploy SAF. And so I think that's something I think we need to think about when it comes to the defossilization of commoditized raw material that we use, is how we create the right market pool in order to transition those raw materials from a fossil-based to a bio-based one. And I'm not advocating for mandates, but I'm just saying we need to have the right regulatory scheme in this case.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. And the regulatory scheme in the United States here is just changing a lot. It's very challenging to pin it down at the moment. But, we are seeing a lot of companies here reformulate because they've seen some regulation shift and they're making big decisions. And I'm thinking of the CPG world of like snacks and foods, like Mars pulling their blue M&Ms and brown M&Ms because they're not meeting the standards that they now have. And maybe there was some regulatory push there as well. And market pull, like market demand too. I mean, consumers don't want to eat that stuff anymore. So it's very interesting to see that.
We also need to think about incentives.
Yes.
Because, at the end of the day, it's really about covering the green premium. Intrinsically, when you compare fossil-based products and bio-based products, there is a premium. Why is that? Because when it comes to fossil-based products, we are talking about extracting fossil resources that are super concentrated in carbon in specific region of the world, going into super large and optimized for a century or more refinery and petrochemical plants.
Yeah.
When it comes to bio-based content, and I think this is super important to have in mind, we are talking about a resource that is spread out first, that is much less concentrated in carbon. Why? Because you have oxygen And so the first thing that you need to do is you need to remove the oxygen in order to fuel or to feed the existing infrastructure. And so this has a cost. It might be simple to think that way, but it shows that there is a premium and we need to be able to cover for this green premium. Yeah. And incentives could be actually a right way. When I talk about incentives, I was talking about VAT reduction. I'm talking about a tax credit, these type of things that can help cover the green premium between the suppliers, the B2C, and the consumer. And to maintain, the competitiveness, to maintain the purchase power, and so on and so forth.
I think you sort of answered my next question, but I would love to ask it again and see if you change your answer. So there is this green premium now, and how do we get to a place where it's gone and we have this consumer standard that we're all paying that commodity price? You mentioned incentives. What else needs to happen? And tell us where you see this bioeconomy developing now and then in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years?
The green premium will remain valid as long as the pricing does not take into account sustainability on one side, or as long as this more sustainable product will have to compete at par with fossil incumbents.
Yeah.
And I think this is what we need to solve for. Mm-hmm. And as we said, it's not an easy one because sustainability is not sufficient in terms of added performance to be priced on the market. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There needs to be a fossil fuel premium to pay for it.
Yeah.
I know that's pretty blasphemous, but anyway.
For me, there is real hope. And going back to the global context, in China, we see now that biomanufacturing is at the same level as sixth generation communication fusion, the next 5-year plan of China. I think there will be massive deployment of biotech. We see India as well, that is getting bigger and bigger in this respect. At the same time, US is continuing on its history of investing into biomanufacturing domestically. And Europe is going to put in place the EU Biotech Act. So I think there will be the framework in the different regions of the world that will really help foster industrial biotech.
Yeah.
But there is also another side about it, which is when it comes to comparing bio-based product with fossil-based product, we have this tendency to go from a one-to-one replacement. We keep the same molecule, right? And then we just try to change sourcing. There is also another way we do that. And actually, in L'Oreal, we cannot do that for everything. So that's why we're also looking at what we call isofunctional solutions, meaning we are looking at same or improved functions through different molecules that are more sustainable by design.
Yeah.
And that also could be, part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that it brings up two things that we do talk about. One is that, for example, when it comes to formulating with bio-based products, it's still relatively new. It's a different world than formulating with chemistry. And then two, many of the bio-based ingredients can have multiple functions. So you might have a color that's also a preservative that maybe has some enzyme activity. And I think there's a lot of that we're learning and will continue to learn. And so I think that's one of the things that makes this so interesting and also gives me a lot of hope. We're getting to the point, Olivier, where we're going to just ask you some quick fire questions. We're very excited to do these. I'll hit the first one. You answer how you feel, and then Erum will do another one. But what is the single most overrated sustainability myth in the beauty industry?
Well, I guess this is what I was telling you before, which is you have different type of ingredients in the beauty industry, and actually the largest volume are functional ingredients that are commoditized. And so it is untrue that the beauty sector can pay for a huge premium for those ingredients.
Yes, awesome. Okay. If nature had a startup pitch deck, which raw plant or microbe are you investing in?
Okay, that's a tough one. Let me just tell you about one startup we are collaborating with right now called Plantable. And they developed this, it's a US-based one, and they developed a cultivation process of duckweed, which is also called lemna. And it happened that it is the fastest growing plant on Earth, terrestrial plant. So it's basically generating a lot of biomass. It's a sink of CO2, and the use of water is minimal. So I am pretty excited by the potential of this plant.
I love that. What is one biological superpower you wish industrial fermentation had right now today?
It will be to be able to translate lab performance at industrial scale in a very cheap and fast way.
Yes, cheap and fast. That's the way we like it.
Yeah.
When it comes to industrial processes, I don't know about other things.
Well, Olivier, this has been a fantastic conversation. We thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to speak with us today.
Well, thank you very much for the question, for the discussion. Thanks a lot, Erum. Thanks a lot, Karl. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Hey, this episode is sponsored by Messaging Lab. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling business narratives. And we have done so for the most successful biotech-forward companies across pharma, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice and elevate your business, visit us at messaginglab.com. Let's grow.
So, Karl, what'd you think of that episode?
I mean, Olivier is very smart and very interesting, and I'm glad he was able to come on, because what he pointed out is that biotech's core bottleneck is this trade-off between sustainability, performance, and cost competitiveness. We talk a lot about how performance is really where biotech wins, and we've seen this with companies like K18 Hair. Biotech is still expensive in many cases. Yes, there are products that are produced using biotechnology at the millions of liter scale, but if it can't compete from a price point of view, no one's really going to pay attention to it, and sustainability isn't enough to drive a product's success. What did you think, Erum?
Yeah, that's the song we sing. It's not just about sustainability. It's about high performance and being able to be cost competitive for sure. And that this is what we need our startup community, those innovators that want to work with these large companies, large brands, brand houses like L'Oreal, to know that there's multiple things that these companies care about, and there's expectations that startups have of working with like a L'Oreal, that they like your innovation and then they're going to all rally around it and do all the lift, when it's quite the opposite, actually. Like, the startups really have to know how to engage in a way that gets in their mind. And we talked a bit about this with Joshua Britton of Debut in our previous episode. They actually have a collaboration with L'Oreal, and really, it's what Joshua said, it's like just aligning on the timeline, the maturity of the technology, and what the outcomes are. So we heard from Olivier today, but it was great to see this concept, this idea Olivier shared, applied through our conversation with Joshua Britton. So it was really great to see that firsthand. So it's not just all talk. Olivier sharing his story through L'Oreal it's very, very interesting.
It goes back to this idea that the best way to improve your odds of commercialization of any product is to de-risk as early as possible. You need that, in many cases, that techno-economic analysis. You need to have your process designed. You need to have partnership models in advance. And the more that you can do that before you scale up, the easier it's going to be for you to commercialize and get the interest of big partners, if that's what you're looking for. I will say, I will just add one thing as we close this out. Europe has been very strong at biotech innovation, but maybe a bit weaker at turning it into industrial scale because of the investment gap that exists in the US and China. On the other hand, Europe has been really great at driving regulatory. And I think that that's really important for the rest of the world to pay attention to, because we don't want it to all be the Wild West. China will produce anything. We have a history of doing the same thing in the US without really thinking of the unintended consequences that happen down the road. So I'm glad that Olivier talked about that. For those of you who've heard us talk about the Advanced Biotech for Sustainability Coalition, Olivier has been one of the driving forces behind that coalition. So you might want to take a look at their website. AB4S puts out a report every other year. They've just put out a great report called the Molecule Manifesto that we were a part of, and Olivier was one of the voices behind that report. So check that out, listeners. It's very much worth reading.
Just what a great conversation with Olivia, and I cannot wait to talk to him again. So that's our episode. We'll love for you guys to join us in person at World Biomarkets in Omaha in September. If you are attending or want to attend, there is a promo code. It's Grow Everything for a 25% off discount. Fun times. I cannot wait to go there. Thanks for tuning in to the Grow Everything podcast. If you have any questions, comments, want to drop us a line, drop us some tea. If you know anything going on behind the scenes that you want to tell us. So our information is in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening, and let's grow.
Let's grow.